Hey everyone, welcome back to Firsthand Globetrotting. This is part 3 of my vlog about my trip to the Outer Banks, North Carolina. So far, I've been having an amazing time, and I know that there's even more great stuff still to come. I've been looking forward to this trip for so long, and I'm so happy that it's lived up to my expectations and completely delivered. In case you missed part 1, I talked about the amazing, seemingly endless beach that I have at my place in Nags Head, and what a great small city feeling this area has. I also took a trip down south as far as the highway would take me to see some of the even smaller oceanfront towns in the Outer Banks. In part 2, I started off by exploring an area that seemed like a desert, hanging out with some dinosaurs, checking out the fishing at a local pier, and exploring the miles and miles and miles of sandy beaches. In case you missed either of those parts, I'll put links down in the description below. Today is the 4th day of my trip, and I'm really excited about what I have planned for today. If you've watched any of my other oceanfront vacation videos, you know that I'm a sucker for a good sunrise or sunset. So, of course, since my room has a balcony that faces the water, I had no choice but to wake up early today and watch the sun rise up out of the ocean. Honestly, I'm surprised it took me this long to check it out. Other than a few people out for an early morning walk or jog, and a few other people waiting for the sunrise, the beach was completely deserted with nothing but the sound of the waves in the background. I think that's one of the things that I like so much about sunrises. Nearly everyone is here on vacation and sleeping in, so this time of morning is pretty much the most calm and peaceful and relaxed that you'll see the beach. It's a little different in the Outer Banks, since even in the daytime the crowds don't get too big, but it's still nice looking out here and getting the feeling that it's my own private beach. There were some clouds on the horizon this morning, so the sun was a little bit hidden when it first popped up, but eventually it found its way over the clouds and really started to light up the sky. I was already a huge fan of where I'm staying, but being able to roll out of bed, walk a few feet over to my balcony, and get an unobstructed view of the sunrise makes this place even better. Maybe one of the other days I'll walk out to the beach to watch another sunrise, but today I'm feeling lazy, so sitting in a chair on my balcony seems pretty good right now. But watching the sunrise wasn't my main reason for getting up now. I actually have some early morning plans in another part of the Outer Banks that I need to get to. I drove up to the northern end of the Outer Banks in Corolla to try to spot some wild horses wandering around. There's a tour company there that gives open-air Humvee tours, so I thought that seemed like a pretty great way to get a beach safari experience while looking for them. When you first get in and start driving, I'll admit, the big Humvee seems like it's overkill as you're cruising down the paved roads in Corolla, driving past all of the beach houses and nice neighborhoods in that area. For this part, you could just as easily be driving your own car down these roads, but trust me, you'll see why they take you in a big truck like this soon. The tour company's office was around a 45-minute drive from Nags Head, and then once we were all loaded in, about another 15 minutes or so driving through the city before the really fun part started, so it gives you a chance to just sit back and relax for a few minutes. Eventually, the driver started to slow down, and the road narrowed, and there was more and more sand starting to spill down onto the road, until the pavement completely disappeared underneath us, and it was nothing but the beach under our wheels. Now you probably get why we're driving around in a Humvee. For this part, because you're literally driving on a beach, you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle to make sure you don't get stuck in the deep sand. In Corolla, they have little air stations where you can let air out of your tires before driving onto the beach, and then fill them back up once you get back to the paved road to make the driving easier. And this is actually considered part of the highway, so there are speed limits and rules for keeping in the proper lanes, and regulations for what to do if you pass someone walking or spending the day at the beach or wild animals or anything like that. This part on its own was such a cool experience. You're driving over the sand with the wind blowing through the car, and then you look over to the side and the ocean is only a few feet away from the vehicle with the waves nearly touching the wheels. To be honest, if I had just spent the morning cruising along the beach, looking out over the ocean, I would have been pretty happy. But the beach road isn't just a scenic drive. There are actually some small towns further north in the Outer Banks that you can only get to using the beach road. Yeah, that's right, there are no paved roads to get there, and you need to drive through the sand to get to them. Eventually, after driving along the beach for a while, some houses started coming into view, and there was a little entryway that we were able to turn into to get into one of those towns. Even in the Humvee, with a driver that lives in one of those towns and drives through the sand every day, we still had some trouble getting through the deep sand that leads to the houses. It made me really happy that I wasn't driving. They must have so many tourists that get stuck out here every year. Once we got into the first town, it was like we were in a little community built on a sand dune. There were some nice big beach houses like everywhere else in the Outer Banks, but all of the little roads and driveways are made out of sand with some small shrubs and greenery along the side of the road. It's sort of like if someone had built a neighborhood on top of Jockey's Ridge State Park, where I was yesterday. If everything else I've shown you in the Outer Banks seems too built up and busy, most of the houses out here are rentals, so you can have an ultra-secluded vacation in a place where there aren't even any stores or paved roads. It wasn't very long after we pulled into town that we got our first wild Mustang sighting of the day. There were 2 adults and a foal along the side of the road, nibbling on some of the plants and enjoying their breakfast. It was pretty great that even though they're wild, they just wander around town throughout the day and don't really seem to care that there are humans nearby. But one of the most important things the guide told us is that these horses are 100% wild, and there are laws protecting them so you can't get within 50 feet of them, or feed them anything, or bother them in any way. After another short drive, we saw a few more horses out grazing in a field. These ones were a little further away from us than the first ones we saw, and it was almost like they were hanging out in the backyards of some of these beach houses. For us on the tour, it was pretty exciting to see all of these horses walking around the town, but I bet if you live here or rent a house here for a week, you probably get pretty used to seeing them after a while. After searching this town for horses and getting our first few sightings, we headed out of town and back towards the beach road to see if we could find any more wild Mustangs further away. I always find it so peaceful and relaxing to drive on small country roads, surrounded by nature and away from all of the cities and towns. But driving along a beach road between a couple of tiny oceanfront towns with nothing but sand and water surrounding you is even better. When we pulled into the next town, the sand wasn't quite as deep, so we had an easier time getting in, and the driver didn't need to back up and retry like he did before. One of the things that really surprised me driving around out here was how bumpy it was on the sandy roads in the towns. There were a few times when I was really glad I had my seatbelt on, because even though we were going slowly, we still got shaken around a lot and tossed in the air. Now I know why we had to sign a waiver before coming. As we were driving around, a blonde horse just casually walked up and crossed the road in front of us without a care in the world. A few seconds later, its friend came too and wandered out in front of the truck. See what I mean? These horses don't seem to be bothered by humans at all. Even though we had a big vehicle, they knew we'd stop for them and walked right by us. I can't really blame them though. They must get used to all of the people coming out here for vacations, and all of the tourists coming on guided trips to see them, and everyone else that comes here to see the wild Mustangs. Most of the horses I've seen in my lifetime are in grassy fields on farms, so there's something so unique about horses wandering through the sand in tiny villages, miles away from the nearest paved road. If you look closely, you can see that some of them wandered right into someone's yard and were hanging out a few feet away from the house. And then other ones made themselves right at home and hung out in someone's driveway, and even went underneath the house to get out of the sun and relax in the shady areas. I bet there are a lot of people here on vacation who walk out to their car and get a bit of a surprise when there's a horse waiting there for them. So driving down the beach road was nice, and seeing these inaccessible towns was fun, and seeing wild horses wander around by the houses was great, but I had honestly been hoping to see some of the horses a little further away from civilization out enjoying the beach. Well, on the drive back, my wish came true. There was a big group of them standing in the sand only a few feet from the ocean, enjoying the cool ocean breeze. This was just the perfect visual, with the wild mustangs relaxing on the beach as the waves rolled in on a beautiful sunny day. I love taking nature tours, and this one really couldn't have gone any better. I was a little worried before we left that I wouldn't see any horses, but in the end I actually lost track of how many there were. At least 20 that I can remember. Even if there wouldn't have been any, just getting to drive alongside the ocean and see those towns would have been a pretty fun and unique experience. But the fact that I got to see horses wandering through the towns, and horses hanging out at people's houses, and horses blocking traffic, and horses on the beach made it even better. Eventually, the sand started giving way to pavement, and we were officially back in Corolla, and the tour was over. A few days ago, I went as far south as I could drive in the Outer Banks to Hatteras, and now I was as far north as I could go in Corolla, so I've driven the entire main stretch. I found a place near the center of town with some nice, brightly painted stores and restaurants, so I stopped in there to look around and find something to eat. One thing that caught my eye was a grilled chicken sandwich that was topped with crab meat. I don't remember ever seeing that combo before, kind of like a unique take on surf and turf, so I had no choice but to order it and try it out. After lunch, while I was looking at a horse statue, I noticed that there was a lighthouse sticking up over the trees. And since this is a coastal vacation, I may as well check out as many of them as I can. Compared to the Hatteras Lighthouse, this one had a much different design, with fairly standard brickwork nearly all the way up to the top. One of the things I really liked was that it had a little pathway made of seashells that led through the trees up to the main entrance of the lighthouse, almost like its shadow. But the best part was that I could go inside this one. Pretty much the entire inside part of the lighthouse is a big spiral staircase that twirls around and around, all the way from the ground up to the top. So I tightened up my shoes and started climbing. I lost track of how many steps there were, but every now and then there would be a little platform where you could stop and catch your breath, or make room in case there was someone coming the opposite direction that needed to pass by you. Eventually, the last few steps came into view, and I could see the sunlight coming in from the open door, and I was able to step out onto the viewing platform and see the Outer Banks stretching out in every direction below me. If you're looking for an aerial view of the Outer Banks, other than maybe a plane or helicopter tour, this view is pretty hard to beat. Since even the hotel buildings here are pretty short and the ground is mostly flat, there really aren't any places that stick up high and give you a nice scenic view over the entire area. It's not like a big city where you can just hop into an elevator and go to the top of the nearest skyscraper to get a great city view. In the Outer Banks, if you want to get a panoramic view from up high, you pretty much have to climb to the top of a lighthouse. I found that the view from up here really gave me the best look at how long and thin the Outer Banks are, since I could always see the sound and the ocean no matter where I looked. It was nice because I had the entire lighthouse all to myself, so I was able to take my time up top and walk around the viewing platform without bumping into anyone else, and really enjoy the view of everything out in front of me. Eventually, I needed to make my way back down to ground level, but at least it's a lot easier to walk down a big spiral staircase than it is to walk up it. I really didn't get to see them very well on my drive this morning because it was so early, but between Nags Head and Corolla, there are a few more small towns lining the highway, kind of like what I saw on my drive down to Hatteras. It's hard to describe, but these towns looked and felt a little different than the ones I saw towards the southern end of the Outer Banks. They felt a little more like traditional tree-lined neighborhoods and less like the sandier beach neighborhoods that I'd seen before. I wouldn't say that one looked better or worse than the other. It was just interesting how there seemed to be a really distinctive difference in the look and feel between the southern and northern parts of the Outer Banks. The more I explore around here, the more I see how much variety you can get. Whether you want a bigger town with lots of activities, or a smaller, sleepier town, or a town you can only get to by driving along a beach, or a town with tree-lined walking paths, or a town with a sandy beach vibe, or anything else in between, it seems like you can find that here. But after hanging out with wild horses all day and climbing to one of the highest points in the Outer Banks, I needed to relax a bit, so I headed right to the beach as soon as I got back. And that's where I spent pretty much every minute of daylight for the rest of the day, laying by the beach, splashing in the waves, and making the most of the sunshine. The eastern part of North Carolina is known for its own special type of barbecue, where they cook up the whole pig and use a vinegar-based sauce, so since I was in the right part of the country for that, I gave it a try for dinner. I'm so used to sweeter barbecue sauces, and I was worried that I wouldn't like the vinegar one, but it actually surprised me how much I enjoyed it. Instead of taking an evening walk by the beach, tonight I switched it up and took a little walking path that runs alongside the beach road so I could get a street-side view of all of the houses. I had walked by these places so many times in the past few days along the beach, so it was kind of interesting to see the front of them. So that's it for day 4 and the end of part 3 of my Outer Banks travel vlog. But don't worry, there's still more to come. I still have more beaches to explore, some more wild animal sightings, other typical tourist things to spend my money on, plenty of seafood to eat, and so much more. So make sure to come back to watch the next part. And in case you missed part 1, I showed you the amazing beach I'm at, and took a drive down to the southern area of the Outer Banks to see what it's like down there. In part 2, I explored an amazing state park that looked like a desert, golfed with a T-Rex, and went to a pier. Links to all of those other parts are down below in the description. If you have any questions about the Outer Banks or my video, ask me in the comments. While you're at it, like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel. On Instagram, I'm Firsthand Globetrotting. On Twitter, I'm Firsthand Globe. Follow me on there. And don't forget, it's an incredible world out there, so pick up your passport and do some firsthand globetrotting of your own.